Thank you, Sophia, and thank you all for coming here tonight on this torrid summer evening to celebrate the translation and publication of The Invisible Valley. We are very lucky to have with us tonight Su Wei and Austin Woerner. Su Wei, the author, is a well-known writer of fiction and non-fiction. Like Liu Beiping, the main character in The Invisible Valley, he was sent down to the countryside as an educated youth as a teenager and spent 10 years on a rubber plantation in Hainan Island. He left China in 1989 following the Tiananmen Square massacre and has been teaching Chinese language and literature at Yale University since 1997. The Invisible Valley is the first of his books to be translated into English. Austin Woerner is the former English translation editor of Chutzpah Journal. Apart from The Invisible Valley, he has also translated 2 collections of poetry and is currently teaching at Duke University in Kunshan. Su Wei and Austin will now give us a presentation about their partnership and the book.
Well, it is a great pleasure to be here tonight and to see so many friends, old and new. Oh, hello. So I'm very excited to be here to tell you the story of how this book came to be. If you've known me any time in the past 10 years, you've probably heard me mention this novel. Some of you probably wondered if it was ever going to materialize. Well, here it is. In fact, some of you have even read it already, which is particularly exciting for me because I spent many years working together with Su Wei to envision this fictional universe together. And now finally, I get to share it with you. Thanks for coming. So I wanted to start by showing you this picture. It shouldn't be hard to recognize the 2 guys in the foreground. But if you look carefully, you'll see there's actually a third face in the photograph. Do you see it? Right? There's a faint silhouette on the wall behind us. I wanted to start off by asking Su Wei to tell us who is that face on the wall. 老苏跟大家讲一讲，那个人是谁？
全文茂。
Yeah.
这是我当年画在那个生产队墙上的一幅画。20-30年后，我们回去那个画还在，所以我们特意在那个画前面照个相。
So this is a portrait of Chairman Mao that Su Wei painted 40 years before that picture was taken when he was a sent-down youth on Hainan Island in southern China.
Yeah.
Looking at this crowd, I'm guessing probably many of you have heard of the sent-down youth movement. But for those of you who haven't, in the late 1960s, towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, Chairman Mao called on all urban educated youth, so young people of middle and high school age, to move to the countryside to be re-educated through agricultural labor. At this point, the cities were in chaos. The schools were all closed, and the kids were just running amok in the streets, forming gangs, fighting each other. And in part to put an end to this chaos, the chairman said, "Go to the countryside, the peasants will be your teachers." And this was an experience shared by an entire generation of people about the same age as the baby boomers in the United States, including Su Wei. And I'm guessing probably maybe other people in this audience. Are there any other former sent-down youths in the audience? 这里有人当过知青吗？
周丽
1, 2, 3. 有认识的人当过知青吗？
Yeah.
Okay.
Couple of them.
Lots of people, right?
知青的孩
Okay.
子
So this is, children of sent-down youth. So this was a movement that touched many, many people. And here is how it touched Su Wei. So Su Wei grew up in Guangzhou, in southern China, a city that in English is also often known as Canton. And like most Cantonese teenagers, he was sent to be re-educated on Hainan Island in China's southernmost province. This is what it would have looked like getting on the boat to go to Hainan, waving goodbye to your friends and family. You might not even know when you're going to see them again, right? And Su Wei, like most of the Cantonese teenagers who went to Hainan, was assigned to work on a state-run rubber plantation in the mountains. That was part of a massive military-style organization called the Agricultural Reclamation Corps, the 农垦兵团, right? And what they were doing in the Agricultural Reclamation Corps is they were clearing the jungle in order to plant rubber trees, in order to increase China's domestic supply of rubber so it could be self-sufficient. So if this were happening nowadays, it wouldn't look so good, right? Basically what they were doing was destroying virgin rainforest. But back in those days, they saw it as this heroic thing. You know, they were pioneers. They were out there doing battle with nature. And here we have a young Su Wei standing on a bulldozer looking very heroic. 这个估计
See me?
Yeah, 这个估计是你17岁拍的吗？还是
17岁
17岁 when he was 17 years old, right?
17 years old.
Yeah.
In the 大会战工地.
Right. So this was so Su Wei spent 10 years on Hainan Island from the age 15 to 25. So most of his young adulthood. And I want to ask him to tell us a bit about what was it like being a sent down youth. 能不能给我们讲一讲就你当时的知青生活是什么样子的呢？具体做一些什么工作什么的？
可能要从刚才那个毛主席像说起。为什么我会去画毛主席像呢？就是我当时是一个很爱画画的人，也很有画画的能力，但是因为我出身很不好，我是黑家庭出身，所以当时能让我去画毛主席像，本来是一方面是一种光荣，另一方面也是一种很危险的工作。但是那时候工作在大会战工地太辛苦了，每天12个小时，所以我觉得我去画画可以偷懒。可以每画一个毛主席像，画2-3个毛主席像就可以等于1天工，所以我把我们生产队的所有的墙上都画了毛主席像。
Okay, so when Su Wei was first arrived on the plantation, he was assigned to do really back-breaking labor. Right? 这个就是你当时种橡胶树的时候，对吧？对。So watering rubber saplings, right?
Yeah.
And this was basically carrying heavy buckets of water into the rubber groves back and forth from the well every day. And he was lucky because he had a natural talent for drawing. And so in those days, there was a big demand for portraits of Chairman Mao. You needed to have them on pretty much every surface. He was like a sacred icon. So they naturally alighted on Su Wei to draw the Chairman Mao portraits. And naturally, he was very eager to do that because that was a day not spent toiling under the burning tropical sun for 12 hours a day. 但是我记得你说过这个是比较危险的工作的，为什么呢？
因为我出身不好，如果你画的不好的话，说你阶级报复，说别有用心，可能会变成阶级敌人。
Right. So this was actually it was somewhat risky work to paint Chairman Mao's portrait because if you painted it wrong, you could get in trouble. You didn't want to make him look ugly. And it was particularly dangerous for Su Wei because he had what they called a bad family background, which basically meant his parents were actually in jail because they were suspected to be counter-revolutionaries, which they weren't. That's another story. So anyway, that is what brought Su Wei to Hainan Island, where he painted that picture and had the experiences that inspired this book. And I feel that this picture is a particularly fitting way to introduce the English novel, The Invisible Valley, because it contains the 3 people who are responsible for its existence: Su Wei, me, and the ghost of Chairman Mao. So at this point, you're probably wondering, how did I end up in this photograph? Right. So Su Wei and I got to know each other when I was a sophomore at Yale College, where he teaches modern Chinese literature. And at that point, I had studied Chinese really intensively for 2 years. I had actually already declared a major in Chinese. But deep down, I really wanted to write fiction. And I hadn't really admitted this to myself yet. And part of the reason I hadn't admitted it was that I had had what to me seemed to be this perfectly ordinary suburban American childhood. It was a very happy childhood, but not one that struck me as a very promising fodder for a novel. Anyway, So here I was sitting in Su Wei's class, listening to him tell stories about being a sent-down youth on Hainan. Very different from my own experiences, right? And he would also tell us about his time as an aspiring novelist in Beijing in the 1980s, at a time when China was just opening up and the whole country was seized by a wave of enthusiasm for literature and the arts. You know, people were really thirsty for ideas. You could finally read something other than the little red book. So here we have some pictures of young people eagerly buying and consuming reading material. 当时真的有这么多人在天安门广场上读书吗？就网上的时候 right? So these are people, just young people out there at night on Tiananmen Square reading.
因为林德里的灯光很亮。
Right, because they're really good light out there, those big floodlights, right? Anyway, this was a very exciting time to be an aspiring novelist because it was relatively easy to make literary history. Su Wei would tell us about how when he moved to Beijing in 1987, he was in the enviable position of having been assigned a studio apartment by his employer. This was at a time when very few people had their own private space. And what Su Wei did was he converted the studio apartment into a literary salon, where he and his friends would gather to have passionate discussions of ideas. And these same friends who gathered in his salon, many of them went on to become some of the most famous writers and cultural figures in contemporary China, the very people whose work we were reading in our textbook. So anyway, those of us who took Su Wei's class heard a lot of literary gossip. And we heard a lot about the salon. So I want to ask Su Wei to describe the salon to us. What was this like? 能不能具体描述一下那个沙龙是什么样子的呢？
OK， 我说的是中文，他翻译成英文。我是最早到美国留学的留学生，1982年就到美国留学，我在 UCLA 读书，然后我又是最早的海归，海归就从美国回到中国是1986年，我回到中国社会科学院文学研究所，所以当时因为我是最早回的海归，社科院文学研究所给我分了一个 studio， 一个大概是这么大。20平方米的一个 studio.
So this was his studio, which was allocated to him by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences after he returned back from being one of the first students to study in the United States, was about 20 square meters. So we're talking about kind of size of this. 大概是这个稍微比这个舞台大一点，对吧？ Yeah, a little bigger than the stage.
在当时这是在北京是一件大新闻。我是一个单身汉，有一个这样一个独立的一个单元，很不得了。所以我当时那里马上就成为北京两个圈子，一个是我在社科院青年学术圈子和我是作家的圈子，两个圈子大家共同使用的一个公众空间 public space 可以说是。
So basically, immediately his salon became kind of a gathering point for two sort of prominent circles of intellectuals at that time. 然后
所以我就配了5把钥匙，然后5把钥匙分在5个不同的好朋友手上，他们随时可以用我的房间。
Right, so he actually made 5 copies of the key to his apartment so that people could come and use the space whenever they needed to have readings or discussions or that kind of thing. And I remember a detail which he didn't tell us, which is that in order to free up the space to have these discussions about literature, he slept in the foyer, right?
我把自己的床塞到一个门廊的一个角落里面。
Right, so he slept in a corner of the foyer, basically.
整个20平方米就成为了一个客厅和一个餐桌，然后就大家就围在那里。
Yeah. So anyway, I found these stories of the things that the conversations and the people who gathered in this salon really fascinating because it was a time when literature really mattered to ordinary people. You know, Su Wei would tell us about how when he was a university student, before then, for example, if you printed a literary magazine and hawked it on the street, you'd sell out your print run within a day. So anyway, so literature really mattered to ordinary people, and it was a time when a novelist could legitimately dream of reaching the masses and actually influencing society. And that was exactly what happened in 1989 when Su Wei and the group of writers and intellectuals who gathered in his salon became involved with the democracy movement that culminated in the student protests on Tiananmen Square. And at this point, and Su Wei would tell us about how he camped out in a camping tent on Tiananmen Square day and night with the students. 就能不能简单的讲一讲你是怎么卷入天安门的故事？
这个故事太长，我很简单的说，天安门广场的第一个帐篷是我从美国带回去的帐篷，放在劳动人民文化宫前面，那是北京第一个知识分子联络帐的帐篷，是我从美国带回去的。
Right, so Su Wei, who had just come back from being a student in the U.S., had brought an American camping tent with him. And so he set it up in a corner of the square as sort of an intellectual's embassy to the students. Right.
然后呢，我的名字最早上了黑名单的原因是，有一个事件叫12学者上天安门，是最早上天安门。一方面支持学生，一方面劝学生撤退的一个活动。
Right. So and then Su Wei was actually a member of a group of intellectuals who went to the square in order to mediate between the government and the students and try to negotiate with the students to withdraw from the square. But as you know, that didn't happen. And so.
所以最后，
escaped, right?
因为我年轻，所以大家把我派驻到天安门广场。我在天安门广场中间跟学生住了2个星期。
对 So he spent 2 weeks on the square. 能不能讲一讲就简单的你怎么逃跑的故事？
然后我在天安门开始杀人的时候，已经接到通知，如果我和其他几个作家在天安门广场中心的不走的话，我们当天就要被逮捕。所以呢，我是接到通知以后，安排完最后的一件事情。隔了一天，我们3个人一起离开了广场。
Right. So
30号，5月30号，没到6月。
So Su Wei and the other intellectuals sort of got a little bit of advance warning that they were told they would be arrested if they didn't get off the square, right? So he left and then traveled back to Guangdong. Right? And then from there, through a sort of complicated underground railroad-like network of safe houses and secret rendezvous points. And then ultimately was escaped to Hong Kong in the false bottom of a smuggler speedboat. And then from there to 你说。
然后其实当时有一个是香港的叫黄雀行动，今天说是黄雀行动，是香港一个电影导演组织起来的，去营救在天安门事件有问题的学生和知识分子。他们把我找到了。
Yeah, so this was a move that some folks in Hong Kong organized to bring out the Tiananmen intellectuals, and then ultimately he made it to the United States, where he has been living ever since.
但第一站是在巴黎。
Yeah. Oh, and he went to Paris first, but anyway, we need to keep moving on. 继续往下讲。Okay. So anyway, I found any excuse I could to go to Su Wei's office hours and listen to him tell these stories. And one day I was sitting there in his office, and I was telling him how I'd studied all this Chinese, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And how, I really wanted to write fiction, but I felt like I didn't have any particular story to tell. And he said, well, why don't you try translating my novel? That's the Chinese original, right? And I thought, bingo. That is what I learned all this Chinese in order to do. I thought that at the very least, even if this project goes nowhere, I would have plenty of opportunities to listen to this guy tell stories. And in some sense, I could be a part of this history too. So I want to tell you what happens in this book. But before I do that, I want to share a fantasy that I had back when we started this project. There's this common idea out there that a work of literature inevitably fades in translation, right? That it becomes dimmer, grows less alive. I thought that if I could talk directly to the author, if I could inhabit his creative vision and channel it directly onto the page, then I could create something in English just as vivid and alive as the original. I could inhabit the book in a way that many translators aren't able to, maybe because their authors are very far away or are already dead. And this idea of inhabiting the book took on a very new meaning in 2009 when Su Wei called me up and said, hey, I'm going back to Hainan Island. Do you want to come along? So anyway, here we are walking down the main street of the camp where Su Wei spent, on the rubber plantation where he spent much of his adolescence. Here we are standing at the well, an important place in the life of a Zhiqing. Here we are standing in one of the rubber groves that he might well have helped plant. 这个应该是你种过的橡胶树吗？
可能那些我种过的已经老了，现在
Okay.
是新种起来
Okay. This is new trees, not ones he actually planted. And then here we are reuniting with Su Wei's 班长,
老班长。
his squad leader. This was an important figure in the life of a sent down youth because it was the most immediate adult authority figure. 就是一个当地的农人, 那个工人嘛. Yeah, so it was a local worker. So still living on the farm after all of those years. Here we are interacting with the local livestock. You can tell from these pictures that Su Wei is a lot more comfortable around animals than I am. And actually, cattle play an important role in this story, which we'll tell later. Okay, so at this point, I think it's important to mention that the experiences that Su Wei had on Hainan Island that inspired the book and the fictional world that he created based on those experiences are two different things. The setting of the novel is directly inspired by Xipei Plantation on Hainan Island, but the story is entirely fictional. So here's the story. Lu Beiping is a bright middle-class kid from Guangzhou. He's sent to Hainan to be a sent-down youth. And when we meet him, he is working on a rubber plantation at the foot of a fictional mountain called Mud Kettle Mountain. And now what you have to understand about China during this time is that it was an incredibly puritanical place. You know, there were all sorts of taboos, things you couldn't do or say or even think. One big taboo was religion. So belief in God or gods or the supernatural was strictly forbidden under Marxist ideology. And another big taboo was sex. What today would be seen as even the most innocent kind of flirtation between two young people was frowned upon. It was seen as bourgeois, 小资, right? A distraction from the important work of making revolution. So anyway, Lu Beiping has grown up in this kind of a straight-laced environment. He's 20 years old, but in a lot of ways, he's a very innocent 20-year-old. And on the plantation, he gets the job of taking the work unit's cattle up onto the mountain to graze. And while he's up there exploring the jungles that cover the slopes of Mud Kettle Mountain, he meets this strange group of people. They call themselves the Drift Folk. They're a small community of migrant woodcutters living in a hidden valley on the mountainside. And Lu Beiping discovers something strange about these people, which is that the group is made up of a woman named Jade and her 3 male lovers and the children that they raise in common. So a family structure like this would be unthinkable in the society that Lu Beiping comes from. And what's more, he discovers that they believe in magic. They have this complicated system of rituals and taboos that they use to keep the spirits of the forest happy. And they believe that deep in the mountains is a giant serpent called the Snake Weird that will come out and wreak havoc on the land if light and shadow, yin and yang, get tipped out of balance. So believing things like this would also be unthinkable in the society that Lu Beiping comes from. So anyway, Lu Beiping is rather interested in these people. And as it happens, Jade, the woman, is interested in him. The two of them begin a romantic relationship, and Lu Beiping becomes another of Jade's lovers and gradually is accepted into the community of the Drift Folk. So this is where things start to get complicated. Lu Beiping is caught between these two worlds. On the one hand, the sensuous, free-loving, but in some ways very traditional and backward world of the Drift Folk. And on the other hand, the straight-laced, puritanical, atheistic world of society under Mao. Lu Beiping is caught between these two worlds. And as it happens, he manages to offend people in both worlds. Up on the mountain, he manages to break the taboos of the Drift Folk, and the Drift Folk begin to turn on him. And then meanwhile, down on the plantation, the authorities get wind of his cavorting with these unsavory characters up on the mountainside, and they make plans to go out and root him out and bring him back to justice. And if you want to know what happens, you're going to have to read the book. So there is only one thing in this story actually happened to Su Wei, which is that he did herd cattle on Mud Kettle Mount. He did herd cattle when he was in Hainan Island. 你确实在海南放过牛是吗？
Right? 这个简单讲一下，我为什么我当时因为15岁是个子最小的，我每天要挑100多担水是教苗圃，所以当时的当地的老乡和当地的一些老知青都说：“哎呀，这个人太小了，让他每天挑100多担水太辛苦了。”后来说干脆让他去放牛吧，所以我就是这样拿到放牛的工作。但放的是78条还是87条牛，就书里面写的，完全用同一个数字黄牛。然后呢？
我翻译一下。Right. So anyway, so when Su Wei first arrived on Hainan, he was initially assigned to this back-breaking work of watering the rubber saplings, hauling buckets of water. Right. But he was 15 years old and a very shrimpy 15-year-old, and quickly the people overseeing him took pity on him, and gave him a less grueling job, which was to herd the cattle in the mountains. And the number of cattle in the book is exactly the same number of cattle that he herded in real life.
Yeah.
But he did, and he saw something out in the mountains that is related to the plot of this book.
所以我在山里边其实很远，见到这么一个人家，一个窝棚，然后就是流散户，一个女人，几个男人。我在猜那几个男人是属于那个女人他们共同的。她是一个女人几个丈夫，我就这么猜测。但是我其实跟他们很远，我连跟他们打招呼的机会都没有。但是这就是这个整个故事的起源。
Right. So when he was out there, he did actually pass through an area where he noticed this hut and a group of people out there. From a distance, he could tell there were several men and one woman, and he sort of guessed from their body language and the way they related to each other. They thought, "Is this a family? Are these men all together with that woman?" But of course, he didn't talk to them. He doesn't actually know what the real story was. So anyway, that was the germ from which the Invisible Valley emerged. Those are the cattle. Okay, so there are a lot of things that make this book challenging to translate. It's full of jargon from the Cultural Revolution, right? 很多文革的套语, right? There's lots of dialect, kind of deep rustic Cantonese, even other dialects like Hakka. There are references to Chinese folklore and folk religion. There are even quite a large number of classical Chinese poems and a long passage of classical Chinese prose. So anyway, and I wanted all of these things to have the same flavor in English as they did in Chinese. So this was a very challenging task. It took a lot of work, many drafts. And really the challenge was bringing my English up to the level where I was able to convey all of the subtleties of the language. This is what the book looked like when I first got it. And that's what it looked like 6 years later after I was done translating it. So, and while I was translating it, I was actually living here in New York. And Su Wei was back in New Haven, so 2 hours away by train. And besides calling him up whenever I had a question about a passage, every month or two I would take the train back to New Haven and we would spend a weekend together, going through a chapter together, scribbling in the margins, drawing pictures, sometimes even acting out scenes. We wanted to show you some of the notes that resulted from this process. This is just a small fraction of the giant mountain of notes that this process generated. I want to show you these to give you a sense of how I went about trying to inhabit the author's creative vision as fully as possible. So one of the things that was really important for me to understand through these conversations with Su Wei was the voices of the characters. This novel is full of dialogue. It's almost like a stage play. And the voices, each of the characters has a very distinct sounding voice that tells you a lot about their personality, where they come from, their social background, all sorts of things. So the first thing that I did was whenever I went through a chapter is I would underline all the voices of the major characters in different colored pencil so I could see sort of the interplay of the different characters' voices. This is a scene where one of the children in the Driftfolk clan has violated one of the group's taboos, and one of the men, named Kingfisher in English, is getting ready to beat him, to punish him. And I wanted to ask Su Wei to read the voice of Kingfisher so you get a sense of what this sounds like in Chinese. 你读普通话吧。
OK， 有脸哭，八哥更加发作了起来。你就是想做扫把星， 我前日一听讲，事情是你阿扁挑引的，我就眼眉跳跳，大吉利是。当初你阿大是被你贬了去的，今日你又，我不会打你，我不想沾你阿扁的彗星，你挨不过这一场打，你就休想下来，阿木。
So those Chinese speakers in the room probably are getting a pretty direct sense of what kind of person Kingfisher is, right? Okay, here is the same dialogue in English, and what you're going to hear at the beginning is the voice of the child who's about to be beaten, Smudge. And then you'll hear this guy. I didn't mean to, he sobbed. I didn't mean to make Uncle Autumn run off. Honest. Don't give me your cheap tears, Kingfisher barked. A bale star is what you are, boy. A kin killer. When I heard it was you that started all this, I just about hit the rafters. Bounty and bliss. First you cross your own paw, and now I can't hit you. I won't. I don't want the breath of shadow on me. But you're not coming down off of that tree till someone smacks some remorse into you. Stump! I won't beat him, Stump said doggedly. I told you, 'tisn't the boy's fault. I'll not play the ugly one tonight. So, and you can see, thanks. You can see how through this process, these characters come alive in my own mind, and they develop voices and identities in English. One of the other things that sometimes through these conversations, I wanted to capture something more intangible about the prose. So for instance, this picture here, this is a diagram, sort of a map of the interplay of of the images in a particular very poetic passage. So you can't read them because they're so small, but it says light, water, fight, bullfight, violence, clay, earth, light. You know, the idea being that those are the most essential things that are the images that are recurring throughout this lyrical passage. Sometimes what mattered most in a passage that Su Wei tried to communicate to me would be the musical impulses behind a passage. So for instance, the musical contours, the speed, you know what, we kind of talked about this in the language of music, 对吧？我们真的是把这个当作音乐来讲吧。对对，你跟大家讲一讲吧。
我自己是一个很爱音乐的人，其实我的写作如果没有一个音乐，没有一个音调，我找不准那个调子，我进入不了写作的状态。所以呢，我经常跟他说，我这个东西本身是跟随音乐一起走的。然后他就会问我，你这一段是哦还是哦？然后我说大概应该是哦。我们经常这样打电话，然后是很奇怪的电话。我的太太在厨房里经常听到我和她这样打一些奇怪的电话，都是高高低低的呼。
So anyway, I mean, like many writers, I mean, for Su Wei, oftentimes it is sort of a musical impulse that kind of is the beginning and the original inspiration of something. And he is also somebody who really loves music, and I actually had a background as a musician. So in a way, we had a common language here, right? And I started, we sort of imagined it as orchestrating this book for English, for those of you who are musicians here. And sometimes, we would have these strange conversations on the phone, where he would be singing kind of the contours of passages to me. I don't actually remember this myself, but he tells me that his wife, Meng Jun, who's sitting over here, would overhear him in the other room singing into the phone and wondering, what is going on here? Anyway, so I mentioned this because in this passage here, you can sort of see this crescendo I've drawn to the climax. This is a scene where Liu Beiping is caught out in the jungle in a typhoon. And it's this very dramatic scene building to this climax. It's lots of action, sort of like a chase scene in a movie. So sometimes another thing that was important for me to understand through these conversations was the physical objects in the novel. A novel's like a play, like I said, and a play has props. And there are always these objects that the characters are, picking up and putting down and giving to each other as gifts or throwing at each other. And many of these objects, these are the objects of their daily life, which for me, often I had never seen these objects before. So it was important for me to understand not just what are they, what do they look like, how are they used, but what do they mean to the characters in the context of their own culture. So see, here we have some pictures that I saved that Su Wei drew of different types of kerosene lamps that the characters would use. There's no electricity out in the jungle, right? They're living in these huts. And so most of the scenes happen by the light of kerosene lanterns. So over here we have pictures of a kind of bulletin board that important announcements would be posted on the camp, 就是一个黑板报, right? The Blackboard Gazette. And then also a common agricultural implement used in the Chinese countryside, the 本机, a scoop basket, which you can still see in the Chinese countryside today. But I had never seen it when I translated this book. So, and I wanted to share with you this one scene because for me this really perfectly captured how important it was to understand the objects and what they mean to the characters in order to be able to clearly visualize it. I'm going to ask Su Wei to read. Okay, this is a scene where Stump, one of the drift folk men, is ministering to Liu Beiping's wounds. Liu Beiping has been injured, and Stump is treating him with traditional Chinese medicine. And so that's what this sentence is about. Those Chinese speakers in the room think about, how would I translate this into English?
阿木从腰篓里掏出一瓶咖盖酒，说是自己用山兰酒米酒泡的，让他喝了可以补虚亏。
Okay, this is all right. There was no way I could have translated this if I hadn't talked to him. This is how this sounds in English. Stump took a small glass bottle out of his wicker hip pouch, saying it contained a special tincture that he'd made himself using dried gecko skins and hillflower rice wine, and made Liu Beiping drink it to replenish his voids. Chinese medicine. So sometimes what I wanted to understand was I need to understand the dwellings that the characters lived in. These are pictures of the thatched huts that the drift folk live in and which many of the scenes take place in. So these are pictures that I drew with Su Wei or showed him later to confirm that I understood the layout. 我忘了是跟你一起画的还是以后给你看的吗？ These are pictures, I painted these myself and I drew them myself.
画得很准确。
Right. Yeah. And here we have this is the hidden valley where the drift folk live. This is again a picture I drew because so many scenes take place here, you know, and so I wanted to make sure I understood the locations of everything clearly, so I was visualizing it clearly, so the reader would visualize it that way too, right?
这个写作是很奇怪的，你自己是个小说家，是个上帝，你写的那个地方，你写的人物就是真的，他就活的，他们按照他们自己的逻辑，所以这些地方对于我是每一个地方大概有几步远，我都是清清楚楚的。结果温厚庭他读完这个小说，他画出来的跟我想象的一模一样，这是我很吃惊的。
Right. So what Su Wei just said is that, you know, when you're writing a book, you're playing God, you're creating this world, and you imagine it really clearly, right? You know exactly how many steps it is between the different structures or whatever it is. But the strange thing was, you know, I actually got this right pretty much on the first try. So anyway, I guess he did a pretty good job of describing it clearly in the book, communicating his vision.
我一点点的看，我说对的，
Yeah, right.
那个鱼池就在那里，那水池就在那里，就完全是对的啊。
Although you actually can see in this one, I said, 我不太清楚阿贤的水滩在哪儿, right? Right. So anyway, I wrote a little note here. This in the corner saying, well, I'm not sure where the pond is that Han was drowned in. Anyway, so this is a map of the whole kind of geographic region where the plot of the novel takes place. Those people who have read the book already can see here up top is Bazaoshan, Mud Kettle Mountain. Here's the hidden valley where the drift folk live. And at the beginning of the novel, Liu Beiping starts in the rubber plantation is sort of off of the map. And as the plot progresses, Liu Beiping follows the course of this winding creek called Mudclaw Creek, deeper and deeper into the jungle. And I wanted to end by reading for you a passage that, one of my favorite passages in the book. It starts right after Liu Beiping has become a cattle herd and has moved into the jungle full time and is spending the nights living in this little hut between the second and third bends of the creek with the corral where the cattle stay. And before I read you this passage, there's one little more detail you need to understand in order to make sense of this passage. So the reason Liu Beiping has been given the job of being a cattle herd to begin with is that at the beginning of the book, he's tricked into marrying the spirit of the work unit foreman's dead daughter, right? So it's basically he's tricked into marrying his boss's deceased daughter. And this is a folk custom called ghost marriage. It's actually
接姻亲，
right.
接姻亲。
It's actually a real thing in China, although it works a little differently. But anyway, so Liu Beiping. So when you hear references to Liu Beiping's ghost wife or to him being a ghost husband, that's what it's talking about. And because, as I mentioned before, religious rituals are forbidden, right? So when after the foreman does this, he's worried the authorities will find out. So he sends Liu Beiping up into the jungle to be a cattle herd where he'll be sort of out of the public eye. So anyway, what I'm going to do is Su Wei is going to read the very beginning of this passage in Chinese, and then I'll read the whole passage in English. I'm going to ask Jeremy to be my page turner here.
OK，
你
我看着这个读也可以。
OK， 行，不，但是还是要看观众吧，这个会好一点，就看这个。
OK， 吴梦之谷，他在日记里这样写道：住进深山的头几天，陆北平就为八丈溪第3道河曲里的这片谷地取了这么一个文绉绉的名字，其实是为了平衡自己内心里被熊野的山林逼压出来的无尽窃惧。入山的第一夜，他就被大野莽林的真面相摄住了。先是那片浩莽的死寂，像铁罩子一般的罩住了他。入夜的山林本来是充盈着各种怪声怪响的，风啸、鸟叫、兽吼、虫鸣，可是落在他的耳膜里，全变成了寂静的分量，压迫过来。每一个声响都烘托着一团寂静，一团团、一块块的累加出分量。那分量越坠越重，越静越深。那一阵阵从骨头里生出来的恐惧，就是这样在那片有重量、有质量的寂静里滋长出来，并且僵固在铁壳子里面了。
继续讲。
OK。
白天
陪的一群犟牛姑，可以装着忘怀一切。一到夜色逼临，那骨头里刻满、爬满、结满的恐惧，就会滋溜溜地钻出来，奸人恼人了。点着油灯，觉得那幽幽的火光，婉月鬼眼一样盯着你。吹熄了灯，更被那片带着潮霉味的无边黑暗压得喘不上气来。确实，时时便觉得会有一种呼吸困难的障碍。OK， 一连几个晚上，他只能将脊背紧紧贴着床边的隔木梁柱上，拥着薄毯，咬牙闭眼的将坐终夜。
All right. Next. Dreamless Vale, Liu Beiping wrote in his journal. This was on his 3rd day living alone in the hills. He'd christened the gully with this florid name, mostly as a counterweight to fear, to the awful, nameless fear that these wilds had woken in him. On the first night, the jungle revealed its terrifying true face. First, there was the silence, a huge, all-encompassing silence that slid shut over him like an iron lid. Actually, the jungle at night was filled with noises, the moaning of the wind, the shrieking of birds, the howling of wild animals, the buzzing of insects, but together these added up to a single, oppressive silence. Every sound threw the silence into sharp relief, and as it grew heavier, deeper, thicker, an irrational fear seeped out of Liu Beiping's bones and hardened around him. By day, flanked by his brawny bulls, he could fancy himself intrepid, but at night, the fear that lay coiled inside him would slither out, ready to devour him whole. Light the lamp, and it became a malevolent ghost's eye, staring at you. Snuff it, and darkness fell over you again, like a vast, wet, moldy-smelling curtain, suffocating you. Sometimes Liu Beiping actually felt short of breath. For several nights he could do nothing but sit against the corner post next to his bed, clutching his sheet, clenching his teeth, his eyes squeezed shut, waiting for morning to come. The only thought that warmed his cold, muddled brain was a keen sense of nostalgia for the bare board bed back in the Ria dorm. If it hadn't been for the gentle murmur of the cattle chewing their cud in the corral next door, soothing his nerves and bringing him back to reason, he'd have screamed, leapt up, and beat a hasty retreat back to camp. Driving cattle by day, driven by fear at night, it strained him to the point of exhaustion. Then, when he had finally mastered fear, boredom became the greater enemy. A mind needs an other in order to exist, an object to reflect back its own consciousness and feeling. Otherwise, herding cattle is boring. Cooking is boring. Making faces at the creek is boring. Isolation and boredom were a slow burn, withering him, wasting him, emaciating him. He needed activity. He needed talk. He needed a sense of mission. He needed to rescue himself. With mock formality, he laid out a cattle herd 5-year reading plan, forcing himself to read his books according to complex schedules broken down by page, line, hour, and minute, all the while taking notes. His dwindling journal entries took on a new form, catalogs of elaborate sobriquets for every single plant, animal, or object in sight, chosen with far more painstaking thought than he'd given to his cattle's foreign nicknames. For example, there was that huge gorgon tree at the head of the trail, the most frequent source of nighttime creaks and rustles. Probably because it stood on an exposed rise, the slightest breeze would send it into a disheveled frenzy. This was the tree that dances in the wind. On sunny days, down by the creek where he cooked and bathed, he noticed 4 or 5 blue dragonflies always flitting around him, and he would whistle to them, start conversations with them, imagining them to be emissaries of the Shadow Kingdom sent to keep a lonely ghost husband company. These, he decided, were the blue dragonflies of fate. In the thick, clammy evening air, he'd sometimes catch whiffs of a keen aroma given off by some jungle plant, making his hair bristle. This was nerve perfume. And that strange sound that he heard from time to time, both during the day and at night, whose source he could never ascertain, it wasn't a bird, nor was it the call of any mammal he'd ever heard. More than anything, it sounded like a baby's wail, but hoarse and alto, calling up memories of sad, wizened infants he'd once seen on a school field trip to an orphanage. This, he concluded with a shiver, was the child crying from beyond the grave. In the end, it was with music. With his little dunhuang harmonica, its tin surface etched with 2 flying nymphs, that Lu Beiping vanquished boredom and fear. After the first few sleepless nights, he began to achieve a kind of mental discipline that allowed him to face the darkness without quailing. First, after bathing in the creek and spreading fresh straw for the cattle, he'd turn on his transistor radio and listen to shortwave broadcasts from one of the foreign stations that did Chinese language programming. Then, by the light of the hurricane lantern, he'd read his books, jot notes, write in his diary. Finally, when his eyes began to smart, it was time for harmonica hour, unshakable as the daily trumpet practice that his musician dad had imposed on him when he was a kid. He'd pick up the instrument, draw a deep breath, and pause, waiting for a lull in the jungle's racket. Then he'd blow a long G major chord, sustaining it till his lungs gave out. Like a boomerang, the merry tones sailed out, rebounding off the bowl of the mud kettle and arcing back into the gully, glancing off the water's surface, ricocheting between the cliffs. A one-note phrase became a symphony of lapping echoes, the sound filtered by the night air to an aching crystalline purity. Warbling glissandos, ululating arpeggios, Mud Kettle Mountain was his own experimental speaker box. The ethereal sounds he'd once conjured from homemade subwoofers welded from spare parts to the oohs and ahs of friends couldn't compare in the least with the Mud Kettle's enormous natural amplification system. While in the mood, he'd play through all the Soviet songs that kids back then knew by heart. Then, from the depths of his memory, he'd dredge up tunes to nursery rhymes his parents had sung. Mama hen, lay me an egg. The rain, it falls, old ladies carry parasols. And perform them all, from beginning to end, in varying concert order. Thus, with the help of his harmonica, Lu Beiping learned to converse with the mountain. His dejection at losing his girlfriend and having to marry a ghost, the gloom of his dreary new jungle exile, his feverish adolescent wants and nameless night fears, his unmoored feeling of isolation and helplessness. All these were held at bay by the harmonica's piping voice, a sound blissful as skating by moonlight, cool as ice cream. They were gathered up in each inhale, expelled in each exhale, and one by one quelled, extinguished.
我说一个作者的感受，我是把Austin 的翻译和我自己的小说对比着看了好多篇章。我知道现在的流行的中翻英，很多翻译家是按美国人的习惯，把作家的东西重新组织过，然后变成了一个新的英文的版本。但是我注意到 Austin 的翻译，基本上它是就在我的中文的整个的感觉上完完整整的翻出来的，而且翻得很地道的英文，这是我很感慨的。
So Su Wei has been comparing the thank you, has been comparing, you know, when he was sitting down and occasionally comparing the English and the Chinese, and he noticed that and this I think gets to the point about, I said in the description of this talk that this was an exercise in creative co-translation. But actually this is really in a very strict sense a translation, in that unlike many, I guess Su Wei told me, and this is not something I'm familiar with, but I guess that many translators of Chinese into English will actually sometimes just rearrange the entire paragraph, you know? They'll basically sort of digest the paragraph and put it back together in whatever order they see fit, right? But actually that's not what I do. I mean, the order of the ideas, you know, sometimes I change the words a little bit, but the order of the ideas is exactly the same in the English as in Chinese. So it is really, in that sense, a translation and not a reimagination. I think we've reached the end of our scheduled programming. So anyway, Jeremy's going to begin the Q&A part.
Great. Thank you, Su Wei and Austin, for a really fascinating presentation. Right, how's everyone doing? If you're hot, just remember that Hainan is a tropical island. Allow the temperature to bring you into the setting for the novel. We're going to have a brief conversation, and then we'll open it up to the questions that I'm sure you're all bursting with. So as we started talking about translation, Austin, working with a text like this, where we're very much not quite in the real world, in speculative fiction in English, you often build the world and then take the reader into it. With The Invisible Valley, literally 4 pages in, the protagonist has been forcibly married to a ghost. But as you say, that is a kind of Chinese folk tradition, but it's unfamiliar to the educated youth Liu Beiping, who's the main character. And the setting, the 1960s, is unfamiliar to present-day readers, and all of this is very unfamiliar to most Western readers. So how do you navigate this, all these layers of unfamiliarity versus what's actually meant to be uncanny and out of this world?
This is a great... This is a great question. I could probably talk for hours about this, actually. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Okay, great. Yeah, so this idea that you brought up of world building, right? You know, the characters are inhabiting a world very unfamiliar to Western readers. And Liu Beiping goes into the mountain and he explores, you know, it essentially enters into another world, which is unfamiliar to him, the world of the jungle, the world of the drift folk, who are these very strange people who believe in all these things that maybe he's never heard of or only read in books. And so for me, so I grew up on a very steady diet of fantasy novels, you know? I mean, I really grew up, you know, for me, people like Tolkien and Le Guin were sort of my guiding lights when I was a kid. And so I think from a very early point, I was very attuned to this idea of world building, because the kind of books that I read that I most loved growing up were the kind of books that created an alternative world for the reader and kind of brought you into that and didn't really fully explain it, but kind of like gave you clues and pulled you along and kind of made you figure it out yourself. And one of the big things that they use to do that is language, right? If you're also a fan of these kind of books, there are lots of invented words, or there are words that are used in a different way in the book than they are in real life. They mean other things. And so basically, right from the beginning, I was sort of trying to think, how can I kind of create these alternate worlds out of language? What does the world of, for a reader not familiar with the background of, the Cultural Revolution, the world of the Cultural Revolution is an alien world, right? What does that world sound like in English? How can I use the flavor of the language to evoke that world? So things like, the jargon of the Cultural Revolution, things like in the first paragraph, it says, that the Liu Beiping is interested in this one other guy, and he goes off into the, but that person, Liu Beiping is interested in this girl, but she's stolen away by this other guy, and he's looking for them, but he can't find them, and he thinks they're out in the forest, 一帮一对红, right? So literally that would mean one help one, one pair red, right? But what that really means is, peers helping each other, right? Become more revolutionary. So I need to think but this is jargon. It's funny because in English, because it's this jargon used to describe this kind of quotidian thing. So in English, he says, "Oh, I'll bet that she's gone off with Fook, the other character. I'll bet that they're off in the jungle seeking peer support." So anyway, so that was a way. But anyway, so I had to think about how should the jargon of the Cultural Revolution sound in English? How should the folklore and kind of the concepts of like yin and yang and light and shadow and all of like a million things, kula jega, right? Like someone would cross someone else or hex. Like there are all these complicated concepts, and I just thought I need to find an organic language in English that kind of evokes those things in English already. And then sometimes I would also even invent language, right? Like for instance, some of like the ancient concepts. Those things that have this kind of classical or archaic ring to them. Like I would sort of coin words that out of Latin roots that would kind of that the reader would be able to guess at those things. So for instance, Liu Beiping and one of the characters in the mountain, they become really good friends, and they decide they're going to kind of become blood brothers in this ritual called 义结金兰, right? Which means 这个该怎么翻译啊？我不知道。
真是很难。
Right. Yeah. But basically, it's this like literally it means the oath of sort of like the oath of
Very
iron.
close brotherhood.
Yeah, the oath of iron and flowers, and there's a whole long reason behind that. But basically, in the book, it just says that it mentions the ferrofloral oath, right? What is this thing, right? You can guess if you know the Latin roots. It gives you a feeling. Sorry, I've gone on a very long time. I said I could talk for an hour about this, right? But yeah, so I was very consciously thinking about the world of the camp, the world of the drift folk, the world of classical China. How do I create language in English that evokes those worlds and kind of hints at the cultural background that the reader doesn't know? So,
yeah, and I've got to say you were very successful in creating a whole separate vocabulary for this. Because translations about the Cultural Revolution often are really quite awkward, and you talk about the sent down youth.
Right.
And then you just have down villaging. They were down villaged. And that's a neat, compact way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Could you imagine, you say like, oh, I was a sent down youth. Oh, I went down to the other village, there were so many sent down youths there. No, nobody would say that. And like if we were talking about ourselves, if we were sent down youths, we would quickly come up with another term. That was a little easier to say.
Yeah.
So the characters refer to each other as re-eds, right? They were down-countryed for re-education. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and this creates the feeling of a very separate world.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. A very unfamiliar, sort of out of time and place.
Yeah.
But does that mirror the experience of actually being part of the Cultural Revolution and actually being a sent-down youth, a Ziqing? What was the experience of being sent down, 下乡, and how much has that affected the sense of unreality of the novel?
Yeah. 你觉得当知青真的是一种另外的世界的感觉吗？
这个话题其实也很大。
It's a big question.
就因为大概有2000万的知青，每一个人的经历和在乡下的经历都很不一样。比如说我当时其实15岁， 当时的法律规定是16岁才可以下乡，我15岁就要下了，但是我是自愿去的。为什么？因为当时我的父亲和我的哥哥关了监狱，我作为家里唯一的一个男孩，每天都要应付3、4次的抄家，要应付很多事情，我受不了了，我觉得我要离开，我自己报名说我要求下乡，所以我15岁就到海南岛。
Right. So just as a little background, Su Wei went to the island when he was 15 years old. At that point, there was a rule saying everybody 16 years old and older had to go, but he went voluntarily earlier because his family was in jail, his siblings were scattered, and every day there were people coming to search the house, red guards coming to search the house. So he went off voluntarily into this other world.
但是回到那个问题，就是因为他的意思是说，
这是我自己，我是自愿去的，但很多人是不愿意去，但也一定要去。
But many people did not go willingly.
Yeah.
And everybody, there are 20 million people have this kind of experience, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's experience was very, very different.
所以对于很多人，到了乡下是很悲惨的，从城市到乡下是很悲惨的人生。但对于我，下乡的生活对于我是我的自己的救赎。
Right. So for many people, it was a tragedy being torn from your families, going to the countryside. For him, in a sense, it saved him. You know,
Yeah,
it gave
saved
him
him.
somewhere to be. Right. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure-
I mean, Cultural Revolution narratives are so common in China that they have their own genre,
Right.
Scar literature,
Yeah.
伤痕文学.
Yeah, yeah.
But this book to me doesn't feel like it fits within that genre because it's almost a celebration or a liberation from the constraints of society, being sent away from everything that's familiar and put on this tropical island to basically run wild. Is that?
我可以说，我为什么会写这个小说，其实跟我自己我就是想，因为现在太多的什么伤痕文学、文化大革命的小说都有一个基本的套路，谁是好人，谁是坏人。我就是想写一本不一样的文革小说，从我自己的经验里边想写出一个，我这里边写了2个山里山外2个世界，我想写出这种独特的对文化大革命、对下乡、对知青的一种独特的理解。
Right. So, as Jeremy mentioned, cultural revolution literature and sent down youth literature is its own genre, full of its own tropes that everybody is already familiar with. And Su Wei wanted to intentionally set out when he began writing this book, he envisioned a cultural revolution novel that was different from all the others, you know. So he very consciously set out to do that. I'm sorry if I did actually answer that question.
No, that's
so,
great.
yeah.
And I'd love to know, would you or have you given a similar treatment to the events of Tiananmen Square? Is that something that you would want to do or be able to do?
也是一个非常严肃的问题。
It's a very serious topic.
在天安门事件以后，我曾经读过，就德国一个哲学家说，奥斯维辛之后没有诗。我在天安门事件以后3到5年没办法回到文学，写不了小说。
Yeah, I think that the answer is no, really.
No,
but
yeah,
I mean, and immediately after Tiananmen, you know, there's this famous saying: there was no poetry after Auschwitz, and that was really how he felt during the 3 to 5 years after leaving China. You know, no interest at all in writing literature. Basically,
所以呢
completely extinguished it. Yeah.
所以呢，在写迷谷的时候，我是重新回到文学，重新捡起笔回到文学。但是其实6·4这个事情，始终是我精神深处一个永远的一个回响。我的任何写作都离不开那个事情的影响。
Right. So he started writing this novel about it was 5 years after Tiananmen, and you know, but so even though he has not actually written about Tiananmen, certainly not written fiction about it, but you know, it still is for him this sort of it's this echo in his mind that he'll return to again and again. It's never not there. It can't be not there, if that makes any sense.
所以认真读这个小说的话，可以读到很多政治的含义、政治的际遇，但是它都不是直接的。
Right. So you know, if you're familiar with the story of Tiananmen, you might notice some things in the book that seem to be refracting that, but most people are not going to notice that overtly. So yeah. So Next, yeah.
Let's talk about the title.
Yeah.
So in Chinese, it's migu, which
Right.
means something like mysterious valley.
Right, right.
How did we get to invisible valley?
Well, let me ask you this question. Would you pick up pick a book off the shelf that was called Mysterious Valley?
I mean, I would.
You would? Oh, really? Okay. Well, so literally what this book means in Chinese is, it can mean sort of, mysterious valley. It can mean enchanted valley or enchanting valley, right?
Lost valley.
A valley into which one
valley,
gets
yeah.
lost, a lost valley, right? Now, if you kind of run through all the possibilities in your head, lost valley, veil of enchantment, enchanted valley, hidden valley, all of these things sound like, Indiana Jones and the Lost Valley. It's like an airport book, right? But, so the key thing, it was a great struggle to try and find a good title. Irene remembers this. The first title was Witching Veil, right? Which didn't really work all that well. I was going through titles constantly, and so I don't know how we alighted on Invisible Valley. I think I just noticed that I felt like it was important that it have valley in it, right? And it's important that it would be the valley, right? Because there's a kind of echo with, for example, Soul Mountain, Lingshan, Migu, right? There are other books with a title named like this, or The Magic Mountain, for instance. So I wanted it to have that sound, and I knew this from talking with Su Wei, that, it should sound a little bit like the titles of those books. But then I don't know, I was just trying out adjectives, and for me, there are these sort of, there are these elements in the book, like when you're reading it, there are things that are referred to, invisibility is sort of this idea that crops up again and again, like the drift folk, the migrants, they're invisible, they're hidden. They live in this valley that you can't see. They're invisible to mainstream society, For some reason, that word invisible just kept cropping up again and again in the English translation, and I thought, oh, the invisible valley. And it's a paradox, right? In English, it's impossible to have an invisible valley because a valley is, by definition, it's empty, right? It's air, right? So I thought that's kind of cool too, right? But anyway, this title is in a sense found in translation because I was trying to make something that worked, that captured the spirit of the original, and had a meaning in the context of the English translation. So, yeah.
I'm just disappointed you didn't call it Uncanny Valley.
其实我觉得应该介绍一下
yeah, okay, I will. So, okay. I was just saying, my agent is actually here. Su Wei mentioned who we had this back and forth about the title, and already so many people have heard these stories already. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So back to the language. You mentioned that there was quite a lot of Cantonese, a bit of Hakka, classical Chinese.
Right.
So it wasn't a straightforward translation job. How do you cope with all these many different voices, and how do you bring them into English?
Also, a question I could spend an hour talking about, right? Actually, I think a good way, where's the clicker? I think a good way to introduce this is for those Chinese speakers who really, so that you can see what we're talking about. I'm going to skip through. So these are my publishers, Kelly and Gavin. Kelly Link, who runs Small Beer Press. They've published really cool books. I just want to have a little shout out to them. But I have to skip through past this in order to get to the page I'm talking about. But if you're interested, check out more of their other books. If you like weird books, check out Small Beer Press. Okay, so this is a passage where Jade, the woman, is talking to Liu Beiping. Liu Beiping she's discovered him. He's bathing naked in the creek, and she's hiding in the bushes watching him, and then she sort of surprises him. And basically, the conversation about this is Jade asks him, "Why do you wear so much clothing?" Right? So, 我们看一下吧，那个是卫生，呵呵，卫生。
你要帮我念一下。
你念一下吧。
卫生，哈哈，卫生。阿佩掂量着这个陌生的，或许是在公社识字班上听说过的字眼，撇撇嘴说：“穿衣服叫卫生，你们吃官粮的年年有布票分配，我们做流散的上哪里卫生去？”细老仔是7月主赶，裤头都没穿紧，他又拔高了，你还想让阿扁他们怎么卫生
？Right. So this word here, 细老仔, right? This is how's it pronounced in Cantonese?
細路仔
Right. So the way that this works is that in the dialogue, Cantonese is a totally different language, basically. If we were to actually write the dialogue in Cantonese, it would be impossible to understand for a Mandarin speaker. So what he's done is kind of pepper the dialogue with these words and phrases in Cantonese that would be recognizable enough to a Mandarin speaker that they could know, oh, that's what it is. And it evokes the feeling that this dialogue is happening in Cantonese. So how do we do this in English, right? It's impossible, right? What does Cantonese sound like in English? There's nothing exists, you know? And so what I needed to think about was, okay, so this is their dialogue it's very low, it has this local sound, you know, this sort of rootsy sound associated with this very particular place. You know, the characters, you know, these are characters these are characters without much in the way of education, you know, and so I was sort of started by thinking about, okay, I need to kind of invent this dialect in English that like people will believe is rural Cantonese, right? So I started doing lots of research and I started looking into all these different things. Like there's like this, there's this like dialect spoken on this island called Tangier off the coast of South Carolina or somewhere. Like I was going off down these rabbit holes of like, okay, maybe what would like a really weird different version of English sound like? But the trouble is, if you actually, in English, if you write, you know, if the characters say things that really peg it specifically to one place, like if they say ain't, you'd be like, well, those are characters, something from the American South or something like that, you know? It would sound really weird if these Cantonese characters in the jungle are saying ain't this and ain't that. So very quickly I discarded that idea and I realized that I needed to get, and I don't know if I should spill the beans here, but I did a lot of reading, different types of writing by writers who were really, had a lot of local color. People like Annie Proulx. Is it Proulx or Prue? I forget. Anyway, Prue. And Dennis Johnson, Train Dreams. I just devoured everything I could that had that kind of language in it and sort of tried to figure out. And I noticed that actually no matter where they were, whether it was in the West or the South or Newfoundland or something like that, there was something in common about the way they spoke. You know, they had, you know, like used a lot of Anglo-Saxon vocabulary, short, punchy rhythm, sometimes very colorful metaphors. And I thought, well, that's interesting. You could take Annie Proulx's Cowboys and put them in, you know, and Newfoundland, and they'd sound exactly the same, you know? So that's what led me to this idea of creating this sort of delocalized kind of rustic English that people would not identify as being from one particular place and would believe it could actually be Cantonese. So this is how that passage sounds in English. Unhygienic, Jade said, pausing to consider this alien word, perhaps encountered once or twice before in a commune literacy class. Then she said disdainfully, wearing clothes, that's what you call hygienic? You dolers get your cloth tickets every year. You eat out of a magistrate's hand. But we drift folk, where are we going to go for our hygienic? My pups grow like bush cane in July. Give them a set of clothes and a month later they'll be busting the seams. So this is how I dealt with that problem, basically. I think that pretty much answers it. So, yeah, but I was constantly struggling this, how do I deal with the Cantonese? That was the big challenge of the book, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So speaking of Annie Proulx's Cowboys, I'm interested in the queer themes of the book and how liberatory it is to have these polyamorous, gender fluid characters who are just not constrained by society's norms. At a time, as you say, when China was especially puritanical and rigid. So was that a conscious act of rebellion or a larger statement of freedom?
他意思说写同性恋，就是为什么会把那个同性恋那个因素就是写到的小说里面呢？
这个小说其实写了两个东西，是我在思考这个小说山里和山外两个世界的时候，其实在这里有一个词叫主题先行。我是一个先从主题出发，就是人在走到了他的绝境的最 bottom line 的时候，最底的时候，他碰到的是什么？其实碰到的一定是这两个问题，就是孔子说的食色性也。呀，吃和性。
Right. So, when Su Wei was envisioning this book, from pretty early on, he imagined it as this juxtaposition of two worlds: the world on the mountain, right, the drift folk world, and the world in the valley, the world of the mainstream society, the Maoist society on the plantation. And he wanted to he asked himself this question of what happens to human nature? What to humans when they're pushed to extremes, and what is the bottom line of human nature? Very, very abstract idea, but to give you an idea of what we're talking about, so basically starting from the Confucius's idea. So Confucius said,
食色性也
right, so what is, okay, how do you translate that anyway? Yeah, so food and sex, that is nature, basically,
Yeah.
right? These are the two basic things, right? So, 你说，继续说吧。
那写关于性呢，那性当然就有异性恋、同性恋，
Right.
在小说里甚至有受教，有各种各样的性。
So the book, there, on the subject of sex, there are many different types, right? There is, heterosexuality, homosexuality, there's bestiality, polyamory, anything you name it, right?
在这小说里都
Yeah,
出现。
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, does that answer the question? I mean, basically, in a way,
Yeah.
a kind of mental experiment, We had to include them all, as it were, right? But his question 就是他刚刚问的是
同性恋的问题。
这个就写这些是故意是一种怎么说呢？一种叛逆吧，或者是一种抵抗主流社会的价值观嘛？
是的，
Yeah.
是的，
是的，Yeah.
我当然，我写这些流散户，当然就写一群跟主流价值观格格不入的，所以我这是另外一个世界活着的人。
Right. So in a sense, I mean, he said it is in some ways consciously a critique of the values of mainstream society, right? But I, the translator, I'm going to point out the drift folk are not a perfect society, right? This is not a utopia, right? They have their own problems.
从我的角度，其实最难写的就是同性恋的部分。
Right.
所以在同性恋的写法上，我是很隐晦的在写，不像在写异性恋，就是陆北平跟阿佩的那个信，我写的很充分，很舒服。
Right.
写陆北平跟阿秋的信，我就收着笔在写。
Right.
但是
收之笔是因为你觉得
这
还是一种忌讳嘛，在社会上。
有这种忌讳和我自己不了解，应该说。
Yeah. So but so in a sense, I mean, at the time it was written, right? I mean, and for the audience he was imagining, I mean, homosexuality is still taboo, and so, I mean, that's reflected in, even though it is critiquing mainstream, the rigidity of mainstream values, but you can see it in the way that the relationships are described, the sort of the sexual, relationship with Jade is described in this very kind of, exuberant way, but with Autumn, it's very more 低调, low key,
low
right?
key, yeah.
More anyway.
Yeah, there's a sense of shame about it. Yeah.
So-
We should
should
open
probably
up to
wrap
the
up. Yeah.
audience.
Yeah.
So if you have a question, please raise your hand and a mic will come to you. Oh, yeah, we've got one.
Just so we don't run out of time, we're just going to collect 2 questions at once and then take them on, and then after that, we'll end.
Hi, thank you very much. It's very interesting. I was interested, Professor Su, you said you saw drift folk when you were in Hainan. And I'm just interested how prevalent during the Cultural Revolution in more remote areas drift folk might have been. Was it more common than we understand, or was it really an unusual phenomenon?
我还是用中文来说。这个在海南当时流散户是很常见的，其实就像今天的非法移民一样，他都是干当地人不愿意干的那些最苦的活。在海南岛，流散户都是一些被社会遗弃到社会边缘的人。
Great. So this was actually this drift folk, these migrants. This was actually a type of people who were quite common at least in Hainan, where Su Wei was. Basically, people who were not part of the official system of the kind of communist, apparatus, and were kind of like illegal immigrants in a way, unpapered, invisible, living sort of off the grid, if you would. So yes, they were real. There really were lots of drift folk. Second question? Yeah.
Yeah, let's take a couple more questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. The reading was intriguing. My question, okay, just so that you can see me. My question would just be, as someone who hasn't read the book yet, what would you like a reader to take away? Is there a takeaway message, or is it just like an open-end imagination? What are we to expect, I guess, to after we, enter into the world and leave after reading it?
And do we have another question? And we'll take them both together. Yeah, at the back.
Hi, I'm a visual artist, not a writer yet, but I was wondering what the process of creating this world was, because you started with like seeing people in your own experience, and then did the idea blossom? And I know you said you started 5 years after it happened, but yeah, I'm just interested in hearing more about the process of writing this book. Like, did you build the world first and then write the story, or did you write the story and let the world unfold through that?
Why don't we answer the second question first, and then the big question is the last one, right? 所以第一个问题就是大概听懂吧？就是那个对，就是会先想象这个世界，还是先想象那个故事？
写小说是一个很奇怪的一个过程，就是我自己写作很长，最开始的写作都是从主题出发的，想到一个主题就去写，我们叫主题先行，然后随后呢是故事先行，想到一个故事，故事先行。那更高明的写法是人物先行，人物先行的下一步是性格先行，性格先行的后面才是情绪先行，有时候是音调相行，一个语言，一个情，一点，一个旋律的先行。
Oh yeah, this is actually something Su Wei said a lot in our class. I remember. So the way he thinks about writing is that there's almost kind of a hierarchy of how people go about envisioning fictional worlds, right? And in Su Wei's own kind of understanding of this hierarchy, basically at the beginning, like the most kind of clumsy way to do it is you start with kind of a theme or a message or a moral or whatever, a subject, right? Then above that you might, 第二个是什么我忘了. And then above that there's first you have the plot. You start with the plot, and then above that you start with the character, right? And then above that 第四个是什么我忘了. And above that you start with the mood, and above that 还有呢?
甚至一个音调。
Yeah. 但是第五个是什么?
第五个是一个旋律。
Yeah, right. And above that, there's even maybe just a musical impulse or something, a tone, a melody.
有时候是一个词。
Right, a word, right? So what you can hear, they're kind of this progression of the possibilities of what could the starting germ of a novel be, right? 然后你是从什么先？
我这个小说呢，这个小说是我自己的，我远远的放牛看到了远远的那个流散户，这是这个起点。但里边还有一条蛇，是个巨大的蛇。我曾经，这是真实的，我去采访过，在当地用机关枪扫下来一条巨大无比的蟒蛇，是当地的蛇神。我当时写了一个这样的散文，有一个作家很有名的叫郑毅，就说：“哎呀，你那个散文写可惜了，你那个完全是可以变成一个长篇小说。”他一句话就把我的心点亮了。这条蛇和这个我和那个流散户的那个关系，一下子就变成了今天这个小说。我就从那里完全没有任何提纲，没有任何计划，就这样往下写，就写出了这个小说。
So the novel basically started from two initial sparks. One was that image of those people out in the jungle that he thought were in this polyamorous family, and then also when he was on the island, he heard this rumor, this story about in one of the neighboring villages or in a nearby mountain, they one of the production teams, they killed a giant snake, right, with a machine gun, right? And so this was a story that he had written. He actually wrote an essay for the World Journal which is one of the major Chinese language newspapers in the United States, recalling this story that he had heard back when he was a sent down youth. And one of his friends, another novelist, said, "Hey, this is a pity that you just wrote a article about it. You should write a novel about that." And so basically it started from those 2 points, the snake and the polyamorous family in the jungle, right? We kind of have to end soon, right? So,
Yeah.
So I know we're close to out of time. So what is the message? I'm not sure. I mean, are you wondering what should you take into the book or what should you take out of the book? Yeah. The latter, what should you take out of the book? 就是说你觉得这个小说有一种教训吗？或者是一种道理吗？想讲吗？
所有的文革小说都想用说教的办法来写。我这个小说特意，我把我自己想说的道理藏得很深很深。我比如说这个小说写的是人性的最底的、最根本的人性的最底层的东西是什么？其实是对人性的最本质的一种思考，其实是相当哲学的。我这个小说，所以很多认识我的朋友反而读不懂我这个小说。但是呢，这个小说又其实是一个非常戏剧性的故事，很好读，甚至很多人认为它很适合拍电影，很戏剧性。但是呢，其实我是想让读者读完这个小说以后，就会永远都忘记不了他读过一个跟所有人写中国、写文革、写中国的政治都不一样的中国的政治小说。
Okay, there's a lot of things there. I'm not going to translate everything because I know we're running out of time, right? But to answer your question, I mean, I think the best way to respond is that this isn't a book that really seeks to deliver a message, or a moral. I mean, really, it's a book that's an exploration of questions. The questions of when humans are pushed into these really extreme environments, what is the kind of the bottom line of human nature? It began with that question, and it's an exploration of that question. So the answer isn't something that there's not one answer he's trying to make you take away from it. There are many possibilities, right? Right, yeah. Right. But what he really wanted to do was write a really dramatic story that nobody would forget, right? Right. Yes, okay, yeah, you got it already. So I forget, you speak Chinese, you're fine, right? So, all right, go ahead.
So that seems like the perfect note on which to finish with the open-ended question and an exhortation to read the book. Su Wei and Austin will be hanging around for a bit to continue the conversation and most importantly, sign books, which happily we have for purchase in the back room. So please stick around, drink some wine, buy a book, and continue the conversation. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.